Found myself wondering there at the end of that song, what a powerful name it is. You have no rival, you have no equal. I just found myself thinking for a moment in my own life and heart, like, Lord, help that be true for me. I don't want anything in my mind or in my heart to be a rival. And I found myself wondering, I wonder what would happen in a group of people if they settled this question: God, whatever you want to do. We will have no rival to you. We will have no rival to where you want to take us. You'll have no rival from us in terms of the kind of people you want to make us. You are a powerful name. I found myself wondering, what would that be like? What would that look like? For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at the ministry of Jesus in just such a small snapshot. You can't do nearly justice to this, but we're going to do 3 weeks of looking at 3 different miracles of Jesus. We'll be starting today with John chapter 2. And in those 3 miracles, I think we're going to see Jesus demonstrating just that, what a powerful name he is, that he indeed has no rival, and that his kingdom and his intent and his desires and his destiny for people will come to pass. He's going to bring it about. He's doing something. The only question is, will we be a part of it or not? And then out of that, we're going to go into an extended series, maybe 8, maybe 10 weeks, somewhere in there, on the book of Acts. How did this whole journey begin? What does it mean to be the church? And we'll go back to the beginning, because this is where the kingdom of God begins to take its fullest form. So I'm interested to see what the Lord reveals to us, what he reveals to me, what he wants to teach us over these next 2 to 3 months. What a powerful name indeed. And I wonder, even knowing that, are you willing this morning to let the powerful name of Jesus do what he wants? What was the most famous wedding in the world? What'd you say? Taylor Swift's? Well, I don't know. Certainly the one that got the most attention the last year. If you ask Google, because of course we know Google is the authoritative source for anything you ever want to know, right? If you ask Google, or the more than 2 billion people who watched the wedding ceremony live when it was aired on TV in 2011, the most famous wedding in the world was between Prince William and Kate Middleton. And I will confess, I watched it. Whether history remembers that wedding the way that it remembers another wedding that took place 2,000 years ago that we encounter in the book of John, well, history probably won't record those 2 things the same way. But the first 11 verses of John chapter 2 do indeed chronicle a wedding that in all other respects none of us should really know anything at all about. It wasn't Taylor Swift and what's the guy's name she married? Mr. Taylor Swift. In this wedding in John chapter 2, we don't even know the name of the bride or groom, so it obviously wasn't anybody famous. We don't know who they were. We don't know who catered the meal or what the menu was. We don't know what music they danced to. We do, however, know what they drank. Right? And we know about it simply because Jesus was there and had something to do with it. So let's turn our attention to John chapter 2. Just open that up. We're just going to kind of march our way through the story. That's why I didn't have the scripture read here earlier. We're going to kind of read it as we go along. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. That's how the story starts. Now, let me pause and kind of set this up a little bit. We'll come back to how this begins. In the whole narrative, John, the gospel writer, is very careful about his language with this wedding and what transpires. He doesn't call what happens in this story a miracle. It was miraculous, but he doesn't call it a miracle. As we'll see at the end, he calls this a sign. And it's a sign that points beyond itself to something greater. That's how signs work, okay? So today, in this wedding at this little town, this village in Cana in Galilee with Jesus and his disciples showing up, we're going to watch what Jesus does at this wedding, and we're going to ask as we go, what is this sign pointing toward? So I'll kind of start now. I've read you the first verse. Let me read the ending verse, and then we're going to go through the journey in between, okay? So John concludes this account, and we'll come back to this, but he concludes this account, verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. That's where we're going to end up, okay? So here's our scene. We're in this village. Jesus and his disciples show up. This is a social event. Now, weddings in that culture were not just a ceremony one afternoon and one evening with a reception. It was even bigger than Taylor Swift and Travis renting out Madison Square Garden and inviting 1,000 people to come. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. Jewish weddings were a whole lot bigger deal because they lasted for days. Days-long celebration of life, and family would come together and hope, and it would be the kind of celebration that people not only had been looking forward to for months, but all kinds of preparation had gone into not just the ceremony, but the celebration together. So here's the families gathered, and there's music and laughter, all that goes on to what a great celebratory wedding should have been. So here Jesus and his disciples are here, and we kind of have to infer from the text that they perhaps have been invited because of Mary. That's what the text seems to suggest, that really the focus here is on Mary. And it may be that this is a marriage involving some of Mary's extended family. And so the text kind of is suggesting here that Jesus and his disciples were not necessarily A-list guests who had been invited. They're sort of hangers-on, right? Mary's the one invited, and then she just happens to bring Jesus and his disciples. And it may, in fact, have even been the case that the disciples weren't invited, they just sort of showed up. Some scholars read this story that way. So here they are, the wedding is going on, the celebration is going on, the party, the feast, the music hasn't stopped, the celebration is going on, but then quietly someone notices they've run out of drink. Now, most of the guests have no idea anything's really wrong, but this in the culture would have been a pretty significant social failure on the part of the family putting on the event. You didn't have enough to provide hospitality to your guests. And if there's anything in the first century Jewish Roman world that was a top priority, was your ability to deliver the proper hospitality to the people you had invited. So running out of wine was a major faux pas, a major black mark on this family. So most of the people yet have no idea this is taking place. But Mary does, suggesting that perhaps somehow Mary seems to maybe have been connected to the family in a more intimate way. She's aware, and of course she goes to Jesus. So verse 3, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to Jesus, "They have no more wine." To which Jesus replies, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not come." Now I want to come back and explain something about that woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not come. That needs a little contextual explanation because it doesn't mean what it sounds like to you that it means. But before I kind of get into that, remember, John calls this a sign. It's pointing beyond itself. And so this really is not a story about wine, it's a story about us. Because this wine here, it represents something more in our encounter with what Jesus is wanting to do with us. Right? Just as the wine was kind of the centerpiece of what made the celebration significant and meaning, it kind of plays that role. It's a marker, to the joy and the satisfaction and the success of the event. If the wine runs out, the party sort of falls apart, right? We can lay alongside of that this truth. There are things in our own life that play that same role for us. Things we look to give our life, our moment, meaning and significance. As long as I have fill in the blank, things are successful. Do you follow? We all anchor our life around something. We all let our life and what makes it work, what makes it a good experience, it all runs on something. The question is, what happens when the something runs out? Because eventually, what we are running on, eventually the things that we look to make our life work will run out. What happens in the wedding party when the wine runs out? What happens in our life when the things that we have built our life around run out? Because eventually they will. And sometimes that happens suddenly. Sometimes it's a catastrophic thing that kind of brings our world to a screeching halt. Sometimes it happens so gradually we don't notice until the joy in our life is gone and we begin to recognize we're in a season where we're just no longer satisfied by anything. Right? Eventually what we're running on will run out. And what that helps us attend to, what it helps give us the opportunity to recognize is this: we were made for something more. We were made for something more. And so here's Jesus having this encounter. He's at this wedding as just a kind of a second level guest, and his mother comes to him. They've run out of wine. And I think we can recognize Jesus saw this moment coming. Right? This would not have caught him by surprise. I think Jesus knew exactly what was going to transpire here. And knowing that, he chose this moment to begin to reveal himself, but in a very unusual way. So here comes Mary. Hey, son, they're out of wine. Now, when Jesus says woman, don't read this through our 21st century egalitarian lens. This is not an insult, okay? The way we would say, woman, if I'm talking to my wife, and I wouldn't dare do this, woman, go bring me a plate of food. That's not what Jesus is saying. In that world at the time, the word he uses is just a common dear. We don't really have an equivalent other than that. It was not an insult. There's not a derogatory term, is what I'm saying. Okay. But what's notable is he doesn't say mother. This is what scholars have really dialed into. He doesn't say mother. Why is that my problem? He says lady, friend, something else. Okay. So it's not an insult, but neither is it a title of affection. Because he's now beginning to say, there's some distance here. Okay. You are not my mother speaking authoritatively to me. Now we're beginning to have a role change. I'm no longer just your son. I'm something else. And he's saying, why is this my problem? I have other things I need to be thinking about. What is happening to the drink supply at some person's celebration really isn't my concern in life. So on the face of it, it sounds like Jesus is saying, not my problem, I don't want to help, I'm not going to do anything. But then he comes right along and he adds this rather curious line, my hour has not yet come. We've got to unpack this a little bit. Here's what's happening. Okay. The word hour should ring a bell to us. And here's why it rings a bell to us. Because later in John's gospel, there will come another time when John will say the hour had come. And that use of the hour had come occurs during the last week of Jesus' life. The hour will come when Jesus will be arrested. The hour will come when Jesus is betrayed. The hour will come when Jesus hangs on a cross and dies. Because when that hour comes is when Jesus is demonstrating the greatest aspect of his glory, his death on the cross. And then comes the hour of the Sunday morning when he walks out of the tomb and the glory of God through Jesus is made even more manifest. These are hours, moments of demonstration of God's glory that have yet to take place. You follow? And then we can also link into this in this conversation when later Jesus and his disciples are talking and they begin to ask about when the Son of Man will come back and the promised Messiah will come and restore the earth, alluding to what eventually John here will later tell the story in the book of Revelation. Rabbi, teacher, Jesus, when is all of this renewal of the world going to happen? And what does Jesus say? No man knows the hour but the Father. But there will come an hour, there will come a moment when Jesus will come back in the full radiance and majesty of his glory. Not as a suffering servant hanging on a cross, but as the King over all of creation once and for all. Those hours lie ahead. And Jesus is saying here at the beginning of his ministry, that isn't the time. I'm not yet to that point. The fullness of my glory, the fullness of why I'm here, everything I want to accomplish is still to come. There's more things to come. But now Jesus uses this moment when the wine has run out to create the first sign. The hour is not yet come, but the journey toward the hour will begin right here. I'm not talking to my mother anymore. I'm not my son, I'm not my mother's son doing a favor for my mother. I'm the incarnate Son of God who's come to put his world back together. And now it's time for the first sign. Do you see the difference? You kind of feel that moment? There's more to come, but it's starting there. It starts here. You see, so this is the first sign. This is what John calls it. Jesus wasn't simply there because he happened to be there to solve an awkward problem at a party. He came because what runs dry in us, because of our fallenness and because of the distance between us and our Creator, because of what sin has wrought and wreaked in our hearts and in our world, what runs dry in us can only be filled by him. That's the sign. Let's move on quickly. Verse 5, his mother says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. John is very particular to give us this detail. We'll come back to it. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. So Mary has one instruction, just one thing. No explanation. She doesn't give any details to the servant. Just one explanation. Whatever he says, do. And I love the simplicity, and I love the implication, the significance. She doesn't know what he's going to do, I don't think. She simply knows who he is. She simply knows who he is. And church, that's still good advice, Mary's words right here. We often demand explanations. Lord seems to be saying this, but I want explanation. I need some proof. I need some signs. Is that the right thing? I certainly do that. And I think Mary's advice right here is good advice for me and for you and for us. Just do what he says. No explanations. Because ultimately what Jesus wants is not so much the direction as it is us trusting him, letting him work, letting his presence be enough to take care of whatever lies beyond that. Do whatever he tells you. Not do it if it makes sense. Not do it if it looks like what you expected. Not do it if it's clear about what comes next. Right? Anybody here ever raised kids? Anybody here ever been a kid? Right? Parents, do you remember that moment when it began to dawn on your children that they they thought they might have a say-so in how things would go. Yeah, you remember that? Like there was that really beautiful time when they were little, like you would just tell them what to do and they would do it. Now, it might have only lasted a week, I don't know. But you remember when they discovered the power of the word why? Go make up your bed. Why? Go take a shower. Why? And it wasn't just because they were curious. You see, here's the psychology of the immature heart and mind. Dad, I know you gave me a direction. Give me the explanation so I can decide whether it's a good one or not. And we do that spiritually. We do that in our walk with Jesus. Jesus says, do this. Why? Give me a good reason. I'll decide if it's a good one or not. Mary says, just do what he tells you. Just do what he tells you. Just do what he says. 6 stone water jars. And this is a rather odd detail. Why does John include this? And he tells us a particular thing, right? These jars were there for ceremonial washing. The one thing they are not were the empty kegs from the party. Okay? And this notion of the jars for ceremonial washing really is quite significant because there's an echo of significance in here that relates to the transformation that's about to take place to the contents in the jar. That the contents in the jar, in a vessel that has been used to represent cleansing and purifying in the Old Testament story and in the Jewish ceremonial law, which would have been a part of the ritual here, the celebration, that's probably why these jars were there. They had been involved in the wedding, in the ceremonial washing that was a part of that marriage celebration. The cleansing from sin, the cleansing from a heart that was bent away from God, the ceremonial washing and the jars that held the water reminded the Jewish people time and time again that sin separates us from God. And that before we can ever enter into the presence of God, before we can ever live in fellowship with God, something has to be cleaned away. We have to be washed. There's something wrong. And John is making a very particular point, however subtly he may be doing it, that the transformation that is going to take place here, that is at the heart of the sign, it involves in some significant way our hearts, our minds, our own lives being washed and made clean. Because if we're going to be the people of God, we have to be cleaned up by God. And so it's very purposeful that Jesus chooses those vessels to do what he is going to do here. And so here they are, these 6 stone jars representing the ceremonial washing that has its long history in the Mosaic law. And now, the one that those jars had been pointing to all along is now standing beside them. Those jars, and I'm speaking metaphorically, right? The cleansing going all the way back to the tabernacle and the basin of water out in front of the Holy of Holies tent. That the very first thing the priests do before they ever entered into the place that would take them into the presence of God symbolically was to wash. Because God is pure and morally upright and clean of heart and clean of mind and clean of hands. And now here is that God standing in the flesh beside the jars. And he simply says to the servant, fill them. And boy, you can grab a hold of just those 2 words. And in many, many ways, you could say those 2 words represent the entirety of the gospel message. Jesus saying to you and to me, fill them. Be filled with something that only I can give. And it's interesting, what is it they get filled with? Ordinary water. I mean, there's no wine. Fill them with ordinary water to the brim. Now, here's another note worth observing about what's happening here. John also tells us something about the volume of the jars. 20 to 30 gallons. Of course, the original language wouldn't have said gallons, so the NIV's done some unit conversion for us, thankfully. 20 to 30 gallons. This is almost a barrel. Okay? Why that detail? 6 jars times 20 to 30. Who's good at math? 120 to 180 gallons of wine. Some of you are going to start getting excited. Okay, if you just taking the volume we're given here and you do the math and you spin it out, you begin to think, how much wine was suddenly available? That wine in those jars would have served over 2,000 people. There were not 2,000 people at a wedding like this. All right? And the point that John is making in this story, that Jesus is making in doing this, is when Jesus begins to transform and when Jesus begins to fill, it happens with great abundance. It's an overflowing. Jesus never seems interested in doing just enough. That life in the kingdom and life when Jesus comes into our lives and we live in Jesus' presence, it's always abundance. It's always more than enough. Think Psalm 23, my cup overflows when I sit at the table that you have prepared before me. My cup overflows. The water never runs out. When the kingdom of God breaks into our world, it does so with overflowing, with joy and with life. That's the presence of God. That's what's happening here. And this is, by the way, a thread all through the Gospel of John. This isn't the last time John tells a story like this. See, just two chapters later, Jesus meets a woman at the well, and he offers her the water that will never run dry. Or later, he will be talking with his disciples, and he will speak to them that they are the branches, and if they remain in him as the vine from where wine comes from, they will never run out of being great fruit bearers over and over and over again. This theme of abundance when you are living in the presence of God. And that's what he wants to do to us. He wants to fill us. He wants to take our old way of living and the old people that we have been, clean it up, purify it, wash it, and fill us over and over and over and over in a life of abundance. Not material prosperity. That's not what he's talking about. But the joy and the significance and the meaning and the purpose. That's what he's come to do. So very quickly, I know I'm going long here, but I got 2 weeks to make up for. Last part of the story. Then he tells them, now take some, draw it out, take it to the master of the banquet. And they do so. We don't know here, when they drew it out, was it wine at that point or was it water? It's a little bit curious that more is not made of the moment in which this transformation takes place. It's almost accidentally mentioned. So they draw some out, and they take it to the master of the banquet like the MC. And John notes it's, at least in his telling, we only find out it's wine at the moment when the master tastes it. When it changed, we don't know. We don't know. And of course, the master of the ceremonies, the text says he didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. So he calls the bridegroom aside and says, wow, everyone brings out the choice wine first. This is the way you do it. And then the cheaper wine after the guests have become too intoxicated to know. That's my paraphrase. But you have saved the best wine until now. You have saved the best till now. And he thinks in doing this is his intention, he's complimenting the bridegroom. That's who he's talking to, right? He has no idea that in reality he's describing Jesus. And this too is of great significance. Because in that culture, much like today in some respects, the groom was the one responsible for providing the wine. Groom has no idea it's run out, apparently. And here he is getting complimented. Boy, not only did you provide great hospitality, like you upped the ante, right? You brought out the good stuff at the very end. And groom's going, I did? Oh, yeah. And there is in this contrast, I think, to the world in which we live, the story that the world will tell us. And I think it's the experience of the world that so often the life we find ourselves living, our best years are behind us. And the longer we go, the further we go on the journey in a broken world, it's downhill, right? This fascination, this sometimes obsession with what things were like in high school or what things were like in college or back when the kids were younger, when the job was better, whatever it is, we all deal with this. We all live it in some way. The story of our broken world, the past was always better. The longer we go, the worse things get. And here Jesus is telling another story, a different story, because this is the way the kingdom works. Right in this whole thing, Jesus is playing the part of the groom. And that's not accidental. That in this narrative, in this first sign, Jesus is providing the wine that was the groom's responsibility. It's Jesus saying to them and saying to us, the best is yet to come. In the gospel narrative, the greatest things still lie ahead for us. The journey that Jesus is inviting us to be a part of as we move ahead. The past is never the best. And even though the present, even though the future may be rocky, great things lie ahead because the kingdom is still unfolding. The first sign here in Cana is but the first sign. It's not the last. That the hour is still to come in which the king comes back and puts all this together. Go back to the opening of John's gospel here, just one chapter earlier. This is the chapter, the prologue, when John tells us that the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. He came to live among us. And what's the very first thing then, as John begins to tell his story, what's the very first thing that God in the flesh does? He goes to a wedding. And this is not accidental. I once heard a story of a widower who every year at Thanksgiving always set one extra place at the Thanksgiving table for his wife who had passed away. The family finally, after years, finally asked him why. And he said, because one day this table won't feel so empty anymore. Every empty chair reminded him that he was still waiting for that day when what had been broken and lost in his life would be made whole again. Right? There's something better coming. And so for him, every Thanksgiving was a sign pointing beyond itself. The chair's empty right now, but it won't always be. Cana, in this story, Cana is that empty place at the table. It was a promise that this isn't a finished celebration, that the work that God is doing isn't done yet, that Jesus is, in fact, preparing something greater. And we notice that the Bible itself begins with a marriage in a garden of Adam and Eve. That's what it is. But do you notice that the Bible ends with a wedding feast? That's the picture at the end of the book of Revelation. It's a wedding feast. It's the marriage supper of the Lamb. And in that wedding feast at the end of Revelation, who is the groom? It's Jesus. Who is the bride? It's the church. It's us. So the first sign toward that picture here at Cana and the miracle of the wine, it's the first glimpse toward that final thing where the world has been put back together, where cleansing has turned into communion, where shame is given way to joy, where that which has run dry is filled to overflowing forever and ever because God is dwelling with His people forever. He didn't come to merely make our lives better. He came to transform us into something new, to be with Him for all of eternity. And that something more is life with Him. And it's available today. And it's available forever. That's the gift. Let's pray together. Jesus, we've sung what a powerful name. Kind of spent time down here into this story of your miracle at Cana. But Father, this morning we just ask that you would touch our hearts, that you would purify us, that you would wash us in the water, that you would cleanse us and help us allow you to cleanse us the way that you want, to wash us free from everything that makes us separated from you. And Lord, then to transform us. Lord, to fill us with what only you can fill us with. To give us the joy and the peace and the hunger and the satisfaction and the energy for your life that overflows day in and day out in a way that only you can, Lord. And that then, Jesus, we would become your people on a mission, full of your life, overflowing with your abundance, being poured out into the world around us to point people to the wedding supper of the Lamb for which we were made. Jesus, help that